Progress.
Gail, are you on? Gail?
Yep, I'm here.
I think you posted this meeting to the wrong account.
Well, I need to go in and check my email, but I posted this 3 weeks ago, as you know.
Right. There's also a water resources meeting scheduled at the same time and we're being bounced out.
I post to the meeting room that the town clerk assigns to me, and that's how it works.
Okay.
So I can verify that tomorrow morning, but we posted, significantly ahead of the public hearing notice going in the same time.
Okay. It is 7:04 p.m. on Wednesday, August 17th, 2022. And I'll call the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting to order. I am Sarah Melish, the chair of the ZBA. I have with me tonight John Benares, Brian Solacey, James Mitchell, Jim Dietrich, and Catherine Howe. We will begin the meeting with a motion to remand a decision. I'll reopen the public hearing on a joint motion by the plaintiffs, John Bouvet, and trustees of the Casamara Realty Trust and Michael Cronin, filed with the Land Court on June 15th, 2022, to remand to the Zoning Board of Appeals the special permit decision filed with the town clerk on March 28th, 2022, which was granted under section 6.1.2, 7.5.2, and 4.1.10F of the zoning bylaw for the enlargement of an existing sports court at 151 Bridge Street, assessors map number 26, lot number 33 in District C. I see Kathleen Hires on. Are you going to speak to this?
Good evening, Madam Chair. I think it's probably more appropriate for Mr. Cronin to make the request, given that it was his special permit.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cronin?
Yes, I mean, I have rescinded the special permit. I think we followed all the rules. I have reduced the sport court to the 2011 approved dimensions of 29 by 46. And everything is back in 100% order and compliance. I did listen to Roseanne at the last meeting, and I know she had some concern about some of the extra basketball courts, the hoops. On my own accord, I took out 2 of the basketball hoops, so there's just 1 remaining in the far corner. Everything's 100% in compliant. So again, all I want to do is rescind the special permit and move on.
Well, okay, it's a little more complicated than that. So we're being asked to annul the decision. Does that mean you're also asking to withdraw your application?
I mean, I'm fine to withdraw the application, plus, again, I'm not moving forward. So I rescinded the special permit and
You can't rescind it. It was remanded to us and we've been asked to annul the decision. And when we receive an application, we either have to approve a decision or deny it. If we're annulling our decision, then the question is, are you withdrawing your application?
yes.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the board? John?
No.
Nope. James?
No.
Brian,
No, I'm good.
Jim,
No.
Catherine?
No questions.
Are there any members of the public who wish to be heard on this matter? With that, I'll make a motion. I move to close the public hearing on the joint motion by the plaintiffs, John Bouvet and the trustees of the Casamara Realty Trust and Michael Cronin, filed with the land court on March 28th, 2022, to remand to the ZBA the special permit decision filed with the town clerk on March 28th, 2022, which was granted under section 6.1.2, 7.5.2, and 4.1.10F of the zoning bylaw for the enlargement of an existing sports court at 151 Bridge Street, Assessors Map number 26, lot number 33 in District C, and approve the request of Michael Cronin to annul the aforementioned decision and withdraw the application for such enlarged sports court at 151 Bridge Street, Assessors Map number 26, lot number 33 in District C, filed with the town clerk on July 15th, 2021, based on the condition that the special permit decision for the original sports court filed with the town clerk on June 25th, 2012 shall remain in effect. Do I have a second?
Second.
Who was that? Brian?
Mm.
Okay. Any discussion? Then I shall take a vote. John,
Approve.
Brian,
Approved.
James,
Approved.
Catherine,
Approve.
and Sarah approves. I'll write this. Who would like to review it?
I can, Sarah.
Catherine, okay, thank you. The next matter before us is the appeal of an administrative decision. I will open the public hearing on the application of Michael Sullivan, attorney, on behalf of Amanda and Christopher Lewis of 2 Woodhome Road, an appeal under section 7.4.5 of the zoning bylaw of the building permit issued on June 3rd, 2022, to add lattice panels to the existing fence and raise the height to 12 feet at 4 Woodhome Road, Assessors Map number 30, lot number 59 in District A, filed with the town clerk on June 13th, 2022. I want to remind people, this appeal is merely with respect to the building permit issued on June 3rd, 2022, to add the lattice panels. I will not allow any discussion with respect to previously issued building permits, the existing fence, any tree clearing, or any disputes regarding the fence or wall along Woodhome Road. I will first ask attorney Michael Sullivan to present the application on behalf of Amanda and Christopher Lewis. Second, I will ask Paul Orlando, the building inspector, to speak regarding the basis for issuing the building permit. Third, I will ask attorney James B. Heffernan, representing Mark Enane, the property owner of 4 Woodhome Road, to speak. After they have all spoken, I will take questions from the board. After the questions from the board have been answered, I will open it up to the public and allow each person to speak briefly only once and limit their discussion only with respect to adding the lattice panels, not other aspects of the fence. Catherine Howe has stated her desire to recuse herself from the decision, so the voting members will be myself, John Benares, James Mitchell, Ryan Solacey, and Jim Dietrich. Attorney Michael Sullivan, would you like to present the application?
Yes, please. Thank you. You can hear me?
Yes,
At some point in the proceeding, would I be able to share the screen to display some photos?
I just turned it on. You should be able to
Okay,
share.
thank you. So I did intend to start and spend a couple of minutes. I know that, and I assume the board has seen it, Mr. Guinane of 4 Woodholm Road submitted I think a 4 or 5 page single space letter purporting to relay some of the history that brings us here. And I wasn't intending to go through that letter in detail. We obviously disagree with it, but I do think some of the history is relevant to what has brought us here. But given the chairperson's admonition, I don't want to proceed in that manner without leave to do so. I wouldn't spend more than a couple of minutes to try to set the stage and use the opportunity to if the board would indulge us to just address that to some limited degree early in the hearing.
I will allow you a couple of minutes, but I want to remind everyone that prior building permits were not appealed within the required time frame, so that they are not before the ZBA, and any other fences or wall that are an issue with the DPW are not matters before the ZBA. And we're not going to discuss all of the other issues that might have occurred on the property.
Okay.
Thank you.
So briefly, Madam Chairperson, again, because I think it is relevant to what has brought us here, I think it's important to provide a little balance to the larger story that Mr. Guinane has tried to tell in his letter. I mean, we basically trust that that letter will give the board a sense of what kind of neighbor Mr. Guinane has been and what the Lewises have had to deal with since they chose to move into this town. And they've basically been terrorized by Mr. Guinane, who, as his own letter suggests, seems to think that he has greater rights than they do because he's lived in the town all his life. He doesn't seem to think that he has to comply with the rules and standards that tie us all together. Apparently, he would not let the board visit his property as part of its normal preparation for this hearing, or so I've been told. And this is consistent with his effort to create what we consider to be an extreme and unreasonable amount of privacy and anonymity. He hasn't been on video in any of the various hearings that have occurred. We had a meeting with the town administrator when he didn't appear on video. We tried to get together to resolve the issues, and that quickly deteriorated in the midst of diatribes by Mr. Guinane. And he wants to build a wall essentially around his property so that he doesn't have to see anyone, and so that anyone doesn't have to see him, or so that he can't, nobody can see him. An unreasonable amount of privacy in the kind of neighborhood that he and the Lewises live in. He's been sanctioned by the Conservation Commission for erecting structures within the town right of way. He had to pay a fine because he put an earlier fence up without a permit. And he's currently under criminal vandalism charges because, and there's a harassment protection order that's been obtained against him by Mr. Lewis after Mr. Guinane smashed a lamppost between the two properties with a baseball bat late on the night of Mother's Day. And that, one of the photos I wanted to display is the lamppost in question. I hope this has come up.
Yes.
This is the lamppost, now smashed lamppost, on the Lewis's side of the previously existing fence, where Mr. Guinane put a no trespassing or private property sign. He can't abide that the Lewises put their garbage over here by the lamppost. He comes over and moves the garbage and smashes the lamppost. This happened on Mother's Day. He was criminally charged. Again, just a little bit of the background. So we filed this appeal 2 months ago because we didn't feel that Mr. Guinane's application and permit provided enough information about what he intended to do. And we didn't feel that it was appropriate to have a 12-foot high barrier between the two properties. It didn't seem to be a fence, as it were. And back at the time, I know Mr. Guinane has pointed the board to certain information that he has loaded onto the building inspector's website, the repository for information, since the time of our appeal. I think he filed those on there this month. But back at the time we filed our appeal, as far as we could tell, there were 2 pieces of public information available in connection with the permit, in addition to the permit itself. The permit said that Mr. Guinane was going to do the work himself and that he was going to erect 4-foot high lattice work on top of his existing fence. And I want to emphasize his existing fence. I should say his then existing fence, because the fence is now different. And these were the two photos that, as far as we could tell, were what accompanied his application. There was this lattice work, which seemed to us at the time to be just the regular old kind of off-the-shelf lattice work that you might get at Home Depot or a similar supply store. And he was going to add this in a seemingly rather makeshift fashion himself, with nuts and bolts on top of his existing fence. That's what the application said or suggested. Creating a 12-foot high, what we considered not to be a fence, but a barrier between his property and the Lewis's property, and unreasonably so. And the other photo was here, which shows, also important, that this is the fence as Mr. Guinane sees it from his property.
Your photos aren't coming up.
Oh, sorry. This is the fence as Mr. Guinane sees it from his property. It's very far from his house, much closer to the Lewis's house. And I think that's important for the board to consider. So this photo and this photo, as far as we could tell, and I tried to verify that with Mr. Orlando, are the only two. And we said to ourselves, well, this really doesn't give a good indication of what he's going to do. And we obviously didn't trust that he was going to do something particularly reasonable given everything that had transpired. And consistent with everything he's done in the past, rather than simply wait for tonight's hearing and see what the board had to say about the situation and whether our appeal had merit, he and his fence company have spent the last few days, late last week and this week, hastily installing a 12-foot high barrier that is different than the one that was applied for and proposed and permitted back in June. Again, as proposed, it was supposed to be 4 feet high of lattice work above his existing 8-foot fence. And he did have a permit for the 8-foot fence, but that's above the presumptive 6 or 7-foot limit of a fence, higher than usual. But we just, indeed, as the chairperson noted, we decided not to appeal that. As built, as currently built hastily in the last few days, rather than waiting for this hearing, this was built. These are photos recently taken from the Lewis's property. I'll show you 3 of them. The fence, you might recall from his letter that he submitted to the board, where he denied that he was doing anything spiteful to simply annoy the Lewis's. He said, if I really wanted to do that, I would have flipped the fence around to put the ugly side towards them. Well, that's exactly what he's done. Notwithstanding the fact that his application said that he was going to put the lattice work on top of the existing fence, i.e. the fence whose good side that you saw earlier was facing the Lewis's, he's indeed flipped it around. He couldn't resist. Put the ugly side towards the Lewis's, and he put the lattice work on top of that over the last few days. And as you can see, that lattice work looks nothing like.
We can't see your picture.
How about now?
Yes.
So you can see that he's flipped the ugly side around towards the Lewis's, and this is what they see right when they come out their front door. And why he did that is just beyond us. A seemingly spiteful maneuver despite what he says. And then he put a different type of lattice work that's not like the photos that I showed you on top of the reversed fencing. And also, it appears that this is the previously existing fencing, or the back side of it, if you will. And then over here to the left, you can see that he's apparently installed some new fencing. So it's sort of a mismatched new sections and old sections. Again, not the previously existing fence with the nice side facing the Lewis's upon which the whole application was premised. Another photo here shows that these are trees that were installed by the Lewis's on their side of the property. As anybody who has these types of evergreen non-deciduous trees, they grow very rapidly. These are going to be as high or higher than this new 12-foot wall anytime soon. There really is no need, as a practical matter, for any further barrier between the two properties. There's plenty of barrier between the two properties, and there's going to be even more barrier when these trees grow in the next year or two. And then lastly, you've got this section that apparently hasn't been completed, and you can see that this is pretty slipshod work over here, where they flipped it around. I don't know what's going on here. I'll try to blow it up a little bit, but you can see that it's pretty ugly. And they're apparently going to put the lattice on top of this section. This seems to be some of the old fence. I'm not sure what's going on here with the posts that don't match up. So that's what's out there now. That's not what was contemplated at the time of the application. And I would suggest to you that he did this over the last few days to make it more difficult for this board to find him against him. Yet again, he thumbed his nose at the process, and I'd suggest that this alone is reason enough to be hard on him and to penalize him. And here are the legal reasons why the appeal should be sustained and why the fence should be returned to its original state, which is what his permit contemplated, with the nice side, if you will, facing towards the Lewises and no more than 8 feet high. The zoning bylaws don't really say anything about the fences until you get to the appendix or the index at the end. And it refers to 6 foot high fences. That's all it says. The state building code, as I think Mr. Orlando will say, states somewhat differently that when you want a fence higher than 7 feet, you need to get a permit. But this still presupposes a need for a fence that's more than 7 feet high. You obviously can't exceed the 7 foot limitation for just any reason. And indeed, the higher examples around town that Mr. Guinane provides are up against public streets and commercial areas. One seems to be down on Beach Street or C Street near the ocean. And the other one is probably the one property in town that more than any other needs a very high fence, and that's the one that is situated directly up against the train tracks. It seems to have a higher than usual fence, naturally so. At least to date, he hasn't put forward any examples of fences higher than 6 feet or 7 feet that serve as a barrier between two properties like this one. And again, this is staring at the Lewises right outside their front door while it's hundreds of feet from Mr. Guinane's house. And 12 feet is certainly too high. There's no need for it. And we suggest that it's not even a fence. It's a combination of materials that is being used to form an unnecessary wall or barrier. And obviously precedent is always important, and what decisions of this board mean for what people can and cannot do down the road. And I would suggest that if Mr. Guinane is allowed to keep this thing, whatever it is, in place, then anyone in town can build a similar thing, which would obviously create a very dangerous precedent. If everybody built these, it would be the ugliest town in Massachusetts. And secondly, another legal reason is that what he has built is not what was permitted. The 4 foot of lattice work is not above the previously existing fence. It's above a new fence, part new, part old, with the panels flipped around with the ugly side towards the Lewises. That is not what the building inspector granted. And again, in terms of precedent, residents cannot be allowed to build something different than what was permitted to them. The whole permitting process depends upon definite, specific plans so that neighbors can decide whether to appeal a permit, and then those same plans have to be followed. Otherwise, residents could describe something very harmless so that no appeal is taken, and then build something different, and people are out of luck. That shouldn't happen. It can't happen. And I would suggest that that's what was done here. And I think that with Mr. Guinane challenged you to take the difficult step of ordering him to take this lattice work down and to flip this fence around, and we think that's exactly what you should do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Orlando, could you please explain the basis upon which you issued the building permit?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so when I get a building permit application, I'm required to determine whether the application complies with the building code and the zoning bylaw. I can't determine whether or not somebody needs 25 bathrooms in their house or a 12-foot high fence. I don't have that kind of discretion. And in this case, the fence is not in violation of the zoning bylaw. The definition of a structure in the zoning bylaws specifically says that fences and walls shall not be considered structures. So they're not subject to the height requirements or the setback requirements of a structure. So I went ahead and issued the building permit for the fence.
Thank you. Mr. Heffernan?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. I have to agree with the building inspector, as while the application doesn't say it, Mr. Attorney Sullivan already admitted the building code, which we're in the 9th edition now, allows for 7 foot, over 7 feet under a permit. We did just that. My client applied for a permit with the building inspector and was granted that building permit. It sounds to me that they're now complaining that the fence is nicer when you look at the pictures. The lattice work is actually well done. My client sent me pictures this afternoon. I believe he's forwarded some to the secretary of the board, so I hope you got those. It looks quite nice. It's quite tasteful. It's premium cedar. It's expensive. And in the own building permit itself, it does state about the 6 by 6 inch posts, which my client shared with the board on his answer to the application, but it was already in the permit now. So the applicant should have seen that in the original permit, that there was a back and forth for concerns about structural and safety. The 6 by 6 post, which by the way is more than required, but and more expensive as you can imagine, but was done. And that contemplates putting in new posts, longer posts to replace some existing fence and putting the 4 foot lattice on top. So I don't believe anything is done wrong by my client here. You know, just a brief notice, because I agree with you. This is not the appropriate venue to talk about any of the other issues. But you know, my client has his share of complaints against his neighbors about other things, about trespass and other issues, and is quite frankly being treated unfairly here. He is a private individual. Yes, his camera is off right now. There's no requirement someone has to have a video on. There's also no requirement that, you know, you have to be so extroverted with your neighbors. He's an introvert. He's admitted that to me today, and he needs the privacy. He needs the screening for noise and light pollution. And quite frankly, if they're already admitting there was an 8 foot fence there, how is adding 4 feet creating a wall out of a fence that was there before? So we quite frankly believe the permit was issued. Purview of the board tonight is only to view this 4 foot lattice, whether it was issued correctly under the building code, Massachusetts 9th edition. I see no reason why the building inspector couldn't issue that. And we hope that you affirm the building inspector's decision tonight. And again, I don't want to waste time on the other disputes. I think that's more appropriate in another venue. So I appreciate you limiting the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I have one statement to make, and that is that Mr. Sullivan is alleging that what's been being built is not in accordance with the permit. That is not something that would come before the ZBA. The proper course of action on that would be to go back to the building inspector and have him take a look and see whether it is in accordance with the building permit or not. We don't make that determination. The only determination we make is, was the building inspector proper in issuing the building permit? I'll now ask other members of the board to ask questions, if they have any. John Benares.
I was just gonna ask that, like, so what's the recourse for this fence coming up, being built not in accordance with the building permit that was issued? So I'd like to hear from Mr. Orlando on that.
Mr. Orlando?
Yeah, well, at the end of the project, we'll do an inspection. And if we find, just as with any job, that if it's not done in accordance with the plans, we would sometimes request amended plans or make them change it to be in accordance with the plans. For instance, sometimes you get a house that's being built and they might have a bathroom that's in one particular place. And that floor plan might change slightly over the course of construction. So then we'll just require them to submit amended plans. If the amended plans comply with the building code, we would approve it.
Sure, but like in this case, because you can drive by and actually see what's being built, couldn't you just theoretically, during a drive by, just say, hey, by the way, it looks like you took the whole fence out and flipped it over. I mean, I would think that's reasonable rather than wait for the whole thing to be done and then tell the homeowner after the fact. But like, by the way, you got to take your fence down, do it the right way.
John, I don't think we have the personnel in order to do that they have to follow the process they follow, which is you do a project and you ask for an inspection at the end.
Now, understood. I'm just, throwing that out there. And then just from the Mr. and Mrs. Lewis's perspective, is safety a concern with the fence along the street? I mean, what's the primary concern here with the height of the fence? Or, maybe we can wait until the rest of the board's finished and then we could hear your thoughts, but I'm just curious to hear from the Lewises on that. And that's all I got.
Okay. James Mitchell.
I have a couple of questions. I've been a licensed builder for over 30 years, and I'm very familiar with the building inspection process, particularly in the cities of Boston and Cambridge. I know, for example, that when things are not being built in compliance with the issued permits, that there is a mechanism called the stop work order, which can be issued by the building inspector. That might be appropriate in this case, but I'll leave that decision to Mr. Orlando. The other things I would concede that the neighbor who's built the fence is building a higher quality lattice assembly. The 6 foot by 6 inch by 6 inch posts that are probably about 18 feet total or 16 feet total because they go deep into the ground. Those are superior quality. The real question I have is why the fence was reversed. And in some of the pictures that Attorney Sullivan shared, the rails don't match up. It's like they were building sections piecemeal. And so I think that between what you might call less than standard or shoddy work, the seeming inconsistency with switching the panels for good side, bad side, all of those things remain a concern for me. And I would ask Mr. Orlando to issue a ruling on whether or not a stop work order is appropriate. The last thing I'll say, and this is perhaps contradictory to this entire affair, 12-foot high barrier, although it is or could be construed as a wall, if the Lewises have planted arborvitae or other fast-growing evergreens, in a few years, this will be a completely moot point. So again, I'm not trying to take sides here. I'm just trying to point out some of the conflicts here. This just seems like a war between two neighbors, and I'm hoping that it can be resolved by the building inspector.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I make just a quick comment on the board, on the flipping the board?
Sure.
I'll just state that the board changed through the design, as you guys all know, with supply chain issues and getting contractors in here. That's part of the reason getting this done. But the boards are actually what they call, quote unquote, ironically here, good neighbor panels, where it's similar look on both sides. And there was also an issue my client had with trying to position certain things on his panel. So it wasn't just a pure flip. I also just caveat, there's nothing in the code, nothing in the building permit, and nothing in the state or the town bylaws that state you have to have the good side facing one way or the other. But I'll leave that comment for you. Thank you.
Brian Solomon.
Yeah, I would say that I've got 2 points or questions. Well, I hear what Mr. Heffernan says. Did by switching the panels, did that go beyond the scope of what was the building permit that was issued? The issue was to add 4 feet, not to reposition or rework the existing. And second, I just got a question as to the pictures that I see, and my understanding is the existing into the town right of way. Will that be removed? That's all.
That has nothing to do with the hearing, Brian. That has nothing to do with the hearing before us.
Just curious. Okay.
No, we're not going to address the other issues. They're irrelevant. The only issue before us was the building permit validly issued?
Fine.
It doesn't matter if it's not being built in accordance with the building permit because there's a different course of action on that. It's not a ZBA matter. So the only issue was the building permit validly issued? And I don't want to deal with the other stuff that has been argued for years. Okay,
And I have nothing else to offer.
thank you. Jim Dietrich. Jim?
Sorry about that. I was muted.
Okay.
I didn't make as much noise as some of the people who are not kind enough to turn off their microphones. This question, I'll address it to the chair, but it goes directly to the building inspector, Mr. Orlando. When this first came up a couple of months ago, I looked through the zoning bylaws and I could not find any regulations stipulating detailed specifications regarding fences, period. And I believe that is still the case. There is something in an appendix, but the appendix does not refer to anything in the bylaw. So I'm wondering why are we even having this discussion since it's not covered in the zoning bylaw? However, the building inspector's job is to make sure that whatever is constructed in town meets the regulations. The building inspector issued a permit to build this fence. And until he goes by and examines the work, and I would encourage him to do that soon, because clearly this is going on for some time and it's created a lot of conflict. Once the building inspector deems the fence is either acceptable or unacceptable or meets or does not meet what he approved, then there might be an issue to be decided. At this point, I don't see why we are even talking about this. I would ask the building inspector, does it matter, or is it in the specifications which side of a fence has to be displayed to which party along a border line? And I'll ask Mr. Orlando to address that, please.
Mr. Orlando?
No, that there's no requirements on which side the fence has to face. And also just to talk about how the fence is constructed, because they were adding these increased lattice panels, I did require them to replace the posts with these new 6x6 posts that are much stronger. And as part of that, that does involve or would require you to take down the old panels and to reinstall the panels when the new posts are installed. So that's what's going on here.
Thank you. Madam Chair.
Yes.
All right. So now we understand, according to the building inspector Orlando, that there is no specification determining which side has to be displayed to what side or which neighbor has to see what part of the fence. So that seems to be just another bit of information thrown out that has no bearing on the case. I don't see, as I said, I don't see why we're even discussing this. It seems that there's an issue, and it seems that the issue should be resolved, but I don't know that the Zoning Board of Appeals is the proper place to resolve this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan, would you like to speak to what the Lewis's concern is regarding the 12-foot high fence?
I would. Could I address some other issues along with that?
Sure.
The key concern about the 12-foot high fence, I mean, we don't know whether or not it's safe. It remains to be seen. The chief concern is that they walk out of their house and they're staring at this thing. I don't think there's anybody else in town who has to do that. There has to be a reason for that. It's ugly. The ugly side is facing them. It's not a fence. It's a combination of materials. I would agree with Mr. Orlando that a fence is not a structure under the bylaw, but this isn't a fence. It's a fence and then something else on top of it that was invented to be added to a fence. But the main concern is that to try to limit this, and I wanted to try to make 2 points about the procedural issues and particularly to Mr. Diedrich's comment about why we're here. I would respectfully suggest that we're here because there was very little information that was provided to the building inspector about what was going to go up. There's a permitting process. The permitting process has to be meaningful. There has to be detailed information that's provided, and there was not sufficiently detailed information that was provided to warrant the issuance of a permit. That was one issue, inadequate information. There weren't plans, there weren't specifications, there was not sufficient detail, and we were concerned about what was going to happen because there was not sufficient guidance that was given. And sure enough, we've got something that's very different than what was permitted. That's exactly what we were concerned about. We couldn't not appeal the permit or we'd be stuck without legal recourse. And it was to preserve our legal rights in that instance. And to the point of, if I understand Mr. Orlando's position on it correctly, that his only consideration was whether or not what Mr. Guinane was proposing violated the bylaw. Again, he didn't provide enough information to determine whether it violated the bylaw. The information he did provide did violate the bylaw. It's not a fence. It's something other than that. Certainly, and the fact that it is not specifically prohibited by any provision of the bylaw does not make it okay. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a permitting process. You'd be allowed to do it without having to go through the permit process. If you come forward asking for something higher than 6 or 7 feet, you should have some legitimate reason or need for that does not unreasonably infringe upon the rights of your neighbors. It's like someone's right to smoking stops at somebody else's nose. Someone's right to smoke stops at the end of somebody's right not to have to smell it. That's the situation here. There's no public way, there's no commercial, there's no beach, there's nothing that should enable Mr. Guinane to have special protection that nobody else in town has. And the fact that it isn't specifically prohibited by the bylaw doesn't necessarily mean, as I think Mr. Orlando suggests, that the permit should have been granted. And and the second issue I wanted to address is, it's a shell game that Mr. Guinane has been playing. It seems readily evident that if nothing else, what he's done is not what was permitted. The panels have been flipped, the lattice work is different. At the very least, I would ask the board to sustain our appeal, but if it's not inclined to do that, to continue this hearing, we'll bring our enforcement request to Mr. Orlando. We'll come back next month or the month after without having to go back to square one, do the enforcement, file a new application fee, which is expensive, and then come back through a new process again. I would suggest that given the information that's before the board, it should accept or assume or continue jurisdiction over this matter, continue the hearing so that we can do that.
Thank you.
If it's not inclined to find for us now.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak on this application? If so, please raise your hand on Zoom. I don't see anybody raising their hand. So I'm inclined to consider a continuance to allow the building inspector to do what he's supposed to do. And if they want the building inspector to enforce something, that he be given the opportunity to do that. What do the other members of the board feel?
Hi, Sarah, it's James. I would concur with that approach. I think it's the most reasonable. And it's probably the fastest way to come to an agreement here.
John?
I'm fine with that. I'm just curious just to hear more about the safety concerns. Mr. Sullivan touched on it, but can you just be more specific? Is it because it's along the driveway as people back out of the driveway onto Wood Home? Like what's the safety concern with the fence? If you don't mind.
Sullivan?
Mr. Benares, I'm not going to try to invent the safety concern. There's sort of a difficult, I'm not with the Lewises. It's hard to communicate with them. I'm not going to sort of make one up. I think there's an inherent concern about something that gets higher and higher and higher, 12, 16, 20 feet. Obviously, at some point in time, you develop concern. We don't know how this thing was built. And I'm not going to rule out the possibility that one of these things can fall down on the heads of one of the Lewises or one of their kids while they're playing ball or something like that. So I just think there's an inherent concern about something like this, which dovetails with the issue of it not being a fence. If they came forward with a 12-foot actual fence that's all in one piece, that would be one thing, but that's not what this is. And we don't know how secure these things are.
Understood.
I see Mr. Orlando has his hand raised. Let him speak.
Yes.
Yes,
Orlando?
yeah. If there are concerns about the structural integrity of the fence or the plans that were submitted, this board is not the board to appeal that to. That could be appealed to the State Building Code of Appeals Board. And throughout this whole hearing, I have not heard Mr. Sullivan talk about which section of the bylaw the fence is in violation of. And I think it's ludicrous to continue this hearing without even hearing that it's in violation of a section of the bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Orlando.
Sarah, it's James. I have one comment, if I may.
Okay. Yes.
I was at the site visit and certainly saw the pre-existing conditions of the 8-foot high fence. I think there is a safety concern at the opening of the driveway with respect to Woodholm Road and a blind spot that's created by this very tall fence. So I think that's the issue that people are speaking to with respect to safety.
But based on what information we were given, the panels are only going up on 80 feet. They're not going all the way to the street. The lattice panels.
That is true, but nonetheless, that there is an 8-foot high section of fence near the street, and that does create a blind spot.
But that's not before us.
Okay.
That was a prior building permit that was not appealed.
Okay. Understood.
Okay. Jim?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm unmuted. We've heard an awful lot of extraneous information tossed around tonight without any factual backup, which disturbs me. People citing the building code, the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw was not written by the ZBA. The zoning bylaw was a product that has been gone through town meeting and other planning boards and other boards. There are a lot of things in the zoning bylaw that some of us may not like, but if they're not in the bylaw, they're not under our jurisdiction, period. We may not like that, but that is what it is. I tend to agree with Building Inspector Orlando. He was given a set of plans. It is his responsibility to see if the plans meet with the requirements that the state has issued. It is not our requirement to do that. So I would suggest that this be adjudicated to the proper authorities who can make that decision. It is not the Zoning Board of Appeals concern. Thank you. And I am not in favor of a continuation because this will just further delay everything. Take it to the right board, get it adjudicated by the proper authorities. It's not our responsibility.
Thank you, Jim. Brian?
I'm in total agreement with Jim. I think that while I appreciate the Lewis's concerns and I totally agree with them in a lot of respects, it's not the purview of this board. If they find another, we're not here to litigate that. I think that the building inspector did his job, and he will continue to do his job in this regard. And just like Jim, I think a continuance is just kicking that can a little further down the road.
Okay. John?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with that. I mean, Mr. Orlando is the code enforcement officer, so I'll follow his lead. I would just hope that, once this thing is built or during the building process, it's inspected and enforced correctly. So that's what I have to say.
James?
I have full faith and confidence that Mr. Orlando can follow up on this and adjudicate the process without any additional zoning board involvement, as Jim Dietrich has suggested.
Madam Chairperson, can I make a final pitch?
Yes, if it's germane to whether
It
or
is.
not the building permit should have been issued, only that.
I just want to make clear that our primary concern is under the zoning bylaw. This is not a fence. That's our primary argument. It's something other than a fence. It had to go through a permitting process, and the permitting process should have meaning, and we can appeal from that. In terms of the continuance, I would respectfully suggest that it is readily evident that Mr. Guinane has built something different than what was permitted, regardless of how the board feels about the permitting process. And that given that readily evident set of facts that's before you tonight, that you would err on the side of fairness towards the Lewises and continue the matter without a finding, so that we can file our enforcement request, get action or inaction from Mr. Orlando, because we're certainly going to go down that route, and then come back someday in the future. If it's resolved, it's resolved, we can withdraw it, but we shouldn't, under the circumstances, we shouldn't be made to, given what we've shown, to have to refile an application for hundreds of dollars and come back months down the road.
I guess the concern I have with that is it would be a different appeal. It would not be an appeal of the building permit. It would be an appeal of an enforcement by the building inspector, and I would see that as a different application. It's a different set of circumstances. So with that, I'll make a motion. I move to uphold the building permit issued on June 3rd, 2022 for adding lattice panels to an existing fence, bringing it to 12-foot high for a span of approximately 80 feet on the lot line between 2 and 4 Woodhome Road at 4 Woodhome Road, Assessor's Map number 30, lot number 59 in District A, and deny the appeal of Amanda and Christopher Lewis under section 7.4.5 of the zoning bylaw, based on a finding that the fences are not considered a structure under the zoning bylaw and therefore are not subject to height or setback restrictions. And the state building code allows building permits to be issued for fences in excess of 7 feet if the building inspector feels they are safe. We find in this instance, the building inspector has done his due diligence and determined the fences. Do I have a second? Jim seconds. Any discussion? With that, I'll take a roll call vote. John?
Approve.
Brian?
Approved.
James?
Approved.
Jim?
Approved.
And Sarah approves. I can write this. Who would like to second it? I mean, who would like to review it?
I'll review it. I'll be happy to review it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks. The next item is a new application. I will open the public hearing for the application of John Olson, Olson Lewis Plus Architects on behalf of Tammy Palmiere and Glenn Warren for a special permit under section 6.1.2 and 7.5.2 of the zoning bylaw, and or other relief as may be necessary to add or enlarge existing dormers, extend an existing gable, raise a roof on an existing tower containing stairs, adding an additional tower and extending existing porches such that the renovations will exceed the 35-foot height restriction, but will not exceed the existing roof height of 46 feet, 8 5/8 inches at 7 Smiths Point Road, Assessor's Map number 20, Lot number 1 in District E, filed with the town clerk on July 18, 2022. Mr. Olson, would you like to speak to the application?
Yes, you asked me at the site visit, you asked me not to do a lot of show and tell. So I don't know how to share a screen. They didn't teach me. This is the existing house. It's at 7 Smiths Point. The client would like to renovate it and return it to its original shingle style of design. We're adding, it's 47 feet tall. We're proposing some changes that are above the 35-foot height limit, which were listed in the application. It's a huge site. It's surrounded, it's by mature growth. It's virtually, the neighbors really have no view of the house. And the fourth side is the ocean. I would think this is it's not more detrimental or injurious to the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll see if the board has any questions. Brian, do you have any questions? I know that let me just say this, there are a number of people who didn't make the site visit. And I just want to say that the location of the existing dormers is such that the new dormer sits at the same level. So it might be a little larger dormer, but the roof is approximately at the same place of the dormer as the existing dormers, and the dormer roofs are significantly lower than the ridgeline of the house.
We're also putting in shed dormers where they had hip dormers. So it's actually lower in a way.
Okay. Go ahead, Brian, do you have questions?
No, I don't have questions. I think architecturally, the new look is in keeping with what's existing, so I don't have any issues with it at all. Excuse the church bells.
Jim?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did not attend the site visit on Monday evening, as you know. However, I have visited the site twice because I was interested in what Mr. Lewis was doing with this old structure. It's one of these beautiful old buildings that we hope that we can preserve in town. And we're fortunate if we have homeowners who are willing to go to the expense to do that. I reviewed the drawings and looked at everything, and it's my opinion that we should grant this permit because it will not really change anything regarding height. Some of it might be a tad higher in places and a tad lower, but it's not significantly different. It is not substantially different. And I feel that we should simply grant this permit. Thank you very much.
James?
Sarah, I have a question. Is this, this looks remarkably familiar to a residence we looked at on an application a couple of years ago. Is this not the same property?
It is.
I do remember touring back then. The homeowner was also very gracious and allowed me to see inside. This is a spectacular residence, and restoring it from a masonry veneer building to the original shingle style architecture is going to be an enormous undertaking in cost. I think the design changes are in keeping with the original intent. It's going to be a better house. I think it's a spectacular project, and I agree with what Jim Dietrich just said about trying to preserve and protect these kind of structures in our community. So I would gladly approve this structure as drawn. Thank you.
John?
I have no questions on the proposal. I support it. And I did receive a note from an abutter on Monday that he wanted to have read into the record from Mirza Sifrik at 16 Smiths Point Road, that he supports the proposal and has no issue with the renovations. So I'm okay with everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine?
Yeah, I don't have any questions. This looks like an improvement to the property. I think it's great. And I don't have anything to add beyond what others have said.
Thank you. I will enter into the record the fact that we received letters of support from 3 neighbors, Ellen and William Cross at 31 Smiths Point Road, Diane and Gary Caneb at 3 and 5 Gales Point Road, and Donald and Juliet Besser at 13 Smiths Point Road. At this point, I will ask if there's any members of the public who wish to be heard on this application. If so, please raise your hand in Zoom. Seeing none, I will move to a motion. I move to approve the application of John Olson, Olson Lewis Plus Architects, on behalf of Tammy Palmier and Glenn Warren for a special permit under section 6.1.2 and 7.5.2 of the zoning bylaw, and or other relief as may be necessary to add or enlarge existing dormers, extend an existing gable, raise a roof on an existing tower containing stairs, adding an additional tower and extending existing porches, such that the renovations will exceed the 35-foot height restriction, but will not exceed the existing roof height of 46 feet, 8 5/8 inches at 7 Smiths Point Road, Assessors Map number 20, Lot number 1 in District E, filed with the town clerk on July 18th, 2022, based on a finding the existing dormer roofs exceed 35 feet, and the proposed dormer roofs will be at substantially the same height, and the other roof changes and gable are modest in proportion to the existing structure and will not protrude above the main ridge line of the existing structure. The proposed use is in harmony with the purpose and intent of the bylaw. The proposed renovations to the existing structure will not be more detrimental or injurious to the neighborhood in which it is located than the existing non-conforming structure, and the requirements and conditions under section 7.5.2 of the zoning bylaw for the grant of a special permit have been met. Subject to the condition, the proposed project is constructed in accordance with the following plans prepared by Olson Lewis Plus Architects, dated July 16, 2022. Exterior elevations existing, AX 2.1, AX 2.2, AX 2.3, AX 2.4, and roof plan proposed A 1.4, and exterior elevations proposed A 2.1, A 2.2, A 2.3, and A 2.4. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
James seconds. Any discussion? I'll take a roll call vote. John?
Approved.
Brian?
Approved.
James?
Approved.
Jim?
Approved.
Catherine?
Approved.
And Sarah approves. Who would like to write this?
Sarah, I'll write it, James.
James? Who would like to review it?
I'll review it, Sarah.
Brian
Jim.
will review it. Jim?
Yes, I'm happy
Okay.
to.
Okay.
Brian's busy now that he's a select person.
Okay. Thank you very
Very
much.
much. Thank you all for your kind words.
The next item on the agenda is another new application. I will open the public hearing for the application of David and Martha Swift for a special permit under sections 4.1.10F, 6.1.2, and 7.5.2, and a variance under section 7.4.6 of the zoning bylaw, and other relief as may be necessary to construct a 30-foot by 56-foot sports court at 39 Coolidge Point Avenue, Assessors Map number 3, lot number 27 in District E, filed with the town clerk on July 18th, 2022. Is there somebody in attendance to speak on behalf of this application?
Hi, this is Bob Griffin from Griffin Engineering. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, good. And I'd like to share my screen if I can, please.
It should be available.
Okay. See how we're doing here.
Oh, I can link on to my own computer.
Can you
Would
see
it-
the map on your plan or on your screen now?
Yes, excuse me just a minute. Would everyone please mute themselves? If there's somebody talking, you need to mute.
All right.
Okay, go ahead,
that
sorry.
sounds pretty good. And I'll just say ahead of time that sometimes there's a train that runs by my office, and so I'll mute myself if that happens, but I don't know what the schedule is this evening, but it does happen. Anyways, so the Swifts own this 1.6 acre property here. I hope I understand many of you had a chance to walk out there this week. And the Swifts have owned the property since about 2017. It's a very steep property, as you probably noticed. There's about 60 feet of grade change from the ocean up to Coolidge Point Road there. They have, a considerable amount of frontage along Coolidge Point Road. It's sort of a long, skinny lot, as you can see. There's also a lot of ledge outcrops on the property, and the presence of the ocean, the steep embankment, the coastal bank coming down to the ocean, and some wetlands that are on the parcel to the northwest here also create a number of wetland constraints that restrict their use of the parcel, as you might imagine. The adjacent properties are used for residential uses. Obviously, this is number 16. This is number 43, and the immediate neighbors are number 37. This parcel here, I think, is the trustees of reservation is undeveloped. This parcel up here is also undeveloped, although I think it's privately owned. So here's an aerial photograph of the Swift property. So here's the main house here in the center of the photograph. Coolidge Point Road is a 20-foot wide private way. They have a guest house and a shed at this location on the property. And this is the steep embankment going down towards the water here that is really a coastal bank. It's a wetland resource area. The Swifts have been really very good stewards of their property. I would say probably excellent stewards of their property. They've done a lot of invasive species removal. They've improved the property from stem to stern. They've renovated the building and got it in good shape. And I think that's apparent when you walk the property. You can see that they do a good job maintaining the property. And I think they'll continue to do that, of course. You can see at the photograph here that this grassy area here is the area of the proposed sports court right next to the guest house, and just beyond it there's a property line. This is the access to the neighboring parcel here at number 43. I think that's about it. The current lot coverage is right now about 10% of the lot is covered by impervious surfaces. So they're not overusing their lot at all with their residential activities. This is our plot plan showing in the northwest corner of the property, the proposed sports court. This dashed line is the setback for an accessory structure on the parcel. And The issue here is that we're within 40 feet of the right of way of Coolidge Point Road here. We're proposing 20 feet or 21 feet off of the right of way line to the fence corner of the sports court here. We're conforming on this side over here where the setback is 15 feet and we have 26 feet proposed from the lot line to the sports court here. You can also see that we've tried to position the sports court in a way that doesn't get into Conservation Commission jurisdiction here. Again, there's a wetland on the property to the north here. And as we come up from the water here, this is a coastal bank, and here's the setback line, the 100-foot setback line for the Concom jurisdiction on this side of the property. So it doesn't leave a whole lot of room for a sports court of the property, but it's mostly constrained by topography and mostly constrained by ledge. Again, the steep grades all along the side and the front of the house here prevent any type of sports court construction there. We have a number of large ledge outcrops around the house and even not far off Coolidge Point Avenue here. This is really the only spot on the existing terrain anyways that's reasonably level and has good soil conditions where we can actually position the sports court without getting into tremendous construction activities. We've tried to push the sports court, as you can see, as close as possible to the guest house. It's really, I think, 3 or 4 feet away from that building, just enough room to pass through. And with those dimensions, the sports court people recommended 30 by 60. We think we can get by with 30 by 56. We're trying to tighten it up as much as we can and still have a functional sports court. The sports court is intended for pickleball and basketball, sort of there'll be a basketball hoop here in the middle back, and you can see it's striped with a 3-point line and the like. But the Swifts, have children, grandchildren, and this is really just for their personal use. They're not trying to do anything more than provide for their own recreational activities and their own guests. The sports court's going to have a 10-foot fence on 3 sides. This is the black PVC coated sort of chain link fence that you've probably seen. Sort of blends in well with the shrubbery and doesn't really stand out that much. And on the front side, there'll be a partial fence 4 feet tall with sort of open in the center to provide easy access in and out of the sport court area. Here's an aerial photograph, and you can see how it fits into the area. This is the parking area that you probably saw when you came up to the property and probably parked your cars here and here. But it doesn't really look like a front yard in that the house sits over here. This sort of looks more like a side yard area, and it is a side yard area. But given the layout of Coolidge Point Avenue, we do have that 40-foot setback on that side to deal with. We think we're going to be able to manage stormwater right in this vicinity here. So we don't think we need large detention areas or things like that. We do have to talk to the Board of Health because the sports court is on top of the septic system, but I think we can accommodate those issues as well. Again, there's no ledge in the court area, and this really fits in well with the existing layout, or as well as possible, I think, with the existing constraints and the existing layout of the property and the walkways and the existing improvements that are out there. Here's a picture looking, so here you'd be standing in this area off of the parking area here, looking to the north. There's that sort of flat area. There's some existing woods along here and along the back. We're not taking down any trees in conjunction with this application. Really, all of the activity is in this grassy area here. Here's a view from the side. So just past the electric transformer, looking again to the grassy area. This is where the sports court ends up going. The Swifts have also engaged a landscape architect, and this is the same architect that has done improvements on the rest of the property, but he's calling for some screening on the back of the pickleball court to be accomplished with some birch trees, some arborvitaes, and some hydrangea plants. There's also some viburnum plants and a number of perennials in the front to provide some seasonal color on the area. I think, obviously a sports court is an accessory use to residential activity. So it's intended to encourage, physical fitness and the good health and active lifestyle of the Swifts. I think it's going to be done in a manner that really has no impact on any neighbors. We don't have any impact on any significant views or view sheds or vistas or anything like that. You can remember from the assessor's map that I showed at the beginning how far away we are from the adjacent residences. The Swifts have spoken to their immediate neighbors and don't have any objections that were raised. We have two issues for the zoning board tonight. One is the special permit criteria for a sports court. Is there adequate room? Certainly there's adequate room on the property. There's no impact from the sports court from any traffic or safety issues. There's no water drainage problems here. We're not, significantly affecting utilities or water supplies or anything like that. I think the fencing will be appropriate to sort of keep the balls on the court and keep them from running out into the road or onto the neighboring property. And it's obviously going to look very nice like the rest of the property when it's all built and installed. In regards to the variance, we have some significant hardships on the property, which are primarily topographically driven and associated with the ledge conditions out here. We've got conservation restrictions that all tend to make it very difficult to position a court at this property without sort of occupying this portion of the site. This is really the ideal area logistically, topographically, construction-wise to put this, and it's going to have really no effect on the neighbors. And again, I think it's going to blend in well with the surroundings, with our landscaping and the black fence and all the rest of that. So I think that sort of summarizes our proposed project. I'd be happy to address any questions at this time.
I guess I do have a concern granting a variance for a sports court. Also on the site visit, I mean, I understand we put pickleball courts out on Summer Street and all the neighbors are complaining about the noise. At the site visit, it seemed like the other houses were relatively close and would be able to hear the pickleball noise. So that makes me a little nervous, whether it's remote enough to do it.
Were the pickleball courts you're referring to on Summer Street, were they private pickleball courts, or was it more for a public
Town.
recreational?
They're town courts.
Right. So
And
really
as soon as
different-
they went in, the neighbors
Yeah.
complained about the noise.
I mean, certainly a town pickleball court's going to get a lot more use than will this facility. And, this is obviously intended to Mr. Swift wants to go out and shoot some baskets. He can shoot some baskets. He wants to play pickleball with his kids or grandchildren. He can do that. I mean, that's the type of use that we're getting. So I think it's significantly different than the Summer Street courts.
John, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I would agree with Mr. Griffin's analysis. I think that the pickleball courts on Summer Street, I mean, they are public, and I think people have been using them very early in the morning. So I think if we were to grant something like this, that the applicant wouldn't be using this at 6 in the morning and, driving the neighbors crazy. I think there's, should be some sort of agreement or understanding with the neighbors out of respect. I understand that because of the nature of the site, that this is being installed within the setback. I suppose I would have a concern if it was a large garage structure or something like that. But the fact of the matter is just a court that will, have some nice screening around it. So overall, I'm okay with it.
Brian?
I would agree with John, but to just tie this in a little more, I think there are 6 pickleball courts on Summer Street. And
Yes.
I think that it emanates from maybe 3 or 4 courts going at any given time. The private court, which probably won't be used anywhere near as much as the public courts go, I don't have a problem with this at all.
Catherine?
James, I have a question.
James, yep.
I think a lot of thought has gone into this, and Mr. Griffin has done an exceptional job in presenting his client's case. The one question I have, and I do think this has been very well designed, I'm just wondering with respect to the 40-foot setback from Coolidge Point Avenue, and this may be a silly question, but if the court were rotated 90 degrees, it looks to me, at least from the site plan, that it would still fit and it would be within the accessory structure zoning setback. So it would effectively need less relief in terms of permitting. I am looking at the topographical lines here, and there doesn't seem to be a great difference in the rotation I'm suggesting, but perhaps Mr. Griffin can address that.
Well, we did talk to the Swifts about the possibility of rotating at 90 degrees, and you can see it sort of, it ends up consuming that entire lawn area there, which is used for recreation purposes and sort of, ruins their ability to use that for recreation. So we looked at it, we tried to stake it out and see what it would look like in that instance, and it just would occupy too much of the property and it didn't fit in with the other existing layout. So that was the reason that we have it where we do.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. I can see how you have a more rectilinear area left over as open lawn space. So that does make sense. Thank you.
Jim?
Am I voting on this application, Sarah, or,
No, you don't need to vote on it.
can I ask a question though?
Yes?
Okay, I did visit the site on Monday afternoon, and I spoke to a woman there. I called the engineering company and asked them to call the property owner to advise them that I would like to visit, and I'm grateful that they did. And I would agree, the landscaping is beautiful. I have the same question that James has. It would avoid a variance if they simply rotated the court. Now, I didn't step it off, and I certainly didn't have a tape measure with me, but I did a little quick sketch on the drawings that we were given, and it looks like it would fit if rotated. And that would avoid a variance. I have strong feelings about variances. I think sometimes we issue far too many of them. The homeowner is concerned about giving up some of that green area, and I can appreciate that, but he's also getting a sports court and willing to give up some of the green area for the sports court. So I'm always a little tentative on these. The fact that the property is what it is doesn't, in my mind, dictate that variances should be given for things like this, and that's how I stand. Thank you. And I'm not voting, so it doesn't really matter, I guess.
Catherine? Catherine?
Hi,
are you
yes.
on? Oh,
I am. I had to switch to my phone. I got kicked out of Zoom.
oh,
But I am here. So I don't have any questions at this time. I think, I see both sides to flipping the court. It would avoid the variance, which, are not meant to be granted lightly. And, it's the homeowner's choice, in terms of whether they'd rather have a sports court or an open lawn, sort of. At the same time, if the neighbors are okay with it and there's not there's no controversy and there doesn't seem to be a huge adverse impact to the neighborhood, it is their home. So I'm a little bit of two minds here, but I don't have any questions.
so Mr. Griffin, can you stop sharing your screen so I can see the board members? Thanks. So what's the sense of the board? Would you rather have them continue it and go back and look and see the feasibility of flipping it so they don't need a variance, or where do we stand?
So Sarah, I'll say that I was thinking about that too, like the idea of flipping it, but I just think aesthetically it looks better the way they have it now, to be honest. And I also think from one of the plans that we saw on the screen, that if we flipped it, it would affect the septic system, and correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it looks like, I don't know like where exactly the septic is, but there was a diagram that indicated on one of the plot plans that Mr. Griffin showed on the screen, that it looks like if we flipped it, it would be sort of right on top of the system. And
Well, what I heard from the Board of Health is that the pickleball court appears to fall entirely over the septic leach area. Hence the need to vent the Coltech chambers. And they said that there's also a reserve area and they're not allowed to build on a reserve area. I don't know where the reserve area is towards the guest parking area.
So there is a septic tank that's associated with the house that's in the area that it would be affected by the 90-degree flip, as was described. The sports court is we're gonna provide some venting for the septic system. Obviously, the Swifts don't want anything to go wrong with their septic system. And people put septic systems underneath parking lots all the time. So that all can be managed. I think it's more of a, what does the property allow and how the Swifts would like to lay out the court that is driving the particular location as opposed to the septic system constraints. I think that we could probably, turn it 90 degrees and still deal with the septic system issues, but clearly the Swifts don't want that 90-degree flip. They've given it, due consideration. I think if they had to flip it 90 degrees, they wouldn't build this thing. And so it's just, the amount of room that they have to work with, it just doesn't really allow it to be flipped 90 degrees in their opinion.
so I would just maintain the design as it stands. That's my opinion. I think it just looks better. And I think if you flipped it, you'd create a lot of dead space around it and it's unusable versus that, rather than having a large, open area of grass as currently contemplated. So that's my opinion on that.
Should we consider imposing some hours of operation in conjunction with issuing the special permit?
I think we typically do, don't we?
Yeah.
No
So-
earlier than 8 a.m. and no later than, I don't know, 8 or 9 p.m. or something like that.
I'm sure that's reasonable.
Okay. So 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Okay, anything else? Except it's pouring out and I have all my windows open. Casement windows.
First time in a month.
With that, I'll make a motion. And one thing I would ask for is you showed us a landscaping plan
Mhm.
that we do not have. We
Yeah.
would like a copy of that to include with the decision.
I just got that from the landscape architect within the last couple of days, but I'll be certain to get that to you.
I move to close the public hearing and approve the application of David and Martha Swift for a special permit under sections 4.1.10F, 6.1.2, and 7.5.2, and a variance under section 7.4.6 of the zoning bylaw, and other relief as may be necessary to construct a sports court at, wait a minute, a 30 by 56 sports court at 39 Coolidge Point. 39 Coolidge Point Avenue, Assessor's Map number 3, lot number 27 in District E, filed with the town clerk on July 18, 2022, based on a finding that the proposed use is in harmony with the purpose and intent of the bylaw, and the proposed sports court will not be more detrimental or injurious to the neighborhood in which it is located, and the requirements and conditions under 7.5.2 of the zoning bylaw for the grant of a special permit have been met. Further, the sports court will encroach into the front setback more than 20 feet, but owing to circumstances relating to the shape and topography of the land, especially affecting such land, but not affecting generally the zoning district in which it was located, a literal enforcement of the provisions of the bylaw would involve substantial hardship, and that the desired relief may be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and will not nullify or substantially derogate from the intent or purpose of the bylaw. Do I have a second?
Second.
John seconds. Any discussion? Oh, wait a minute, I need to add, sorry. I need to add to the motion. Based on the following conditions, that the sports court is located in accordance with the plot plan dated July 18, 2022, that there will be a 10-foot high fence on 3 sides of the sports court with landscaping in accordance with the landscaping plan to be provided to us, and that the hours of operation shall be limited to 8 a.m., between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. Do you second that, John?
Yes, second.
Any discussion?
I just have one comment, Sarah.
Yeah.
And I realize I'm not voting, but I was looking at the drawing and it appears to me that part of the existing house there is already in the setback.
Right, but that's not before us.
No, I'm simply observing that. So
Oh.
I would change my opinion and say a variance to have something else further go into the setback is not in any way more detrimental than the fact that the house is already existing in the setback through no fault of the current owner. So
Okay,
I just wanted to my remarks to be properly clarified, and thank you.
okay, thanks. Take a roll call vote. John,
Approve.
Brian,
Approved.
James.
Approve.
Catherine,
Approve.
and Sarah approves.
Okay, well, thank you all very much and good evening.
Okay, thanks. And who's gonna write this one?
I'll write it, Sarah.
John,
And I
we'll
can
review it.
I will-
Brian will review it. Okay, thanks. We now will move on to administrative matters. Approval of minutes. We have,
May I clear something up now?
yes,
Okay, I went online and on July 21st, we were assigned Manchester by the Sea 2. And I see that we were in Manchester by the Sea 2.
no, we're in Manchester by the C3. That was the problem. It wasn't in 2, because I tried going into 2.
Well, then I made the mistake. It's mine.
Okay,
I'll own it. I'll own it. I tried not to, but I'll own it. Sorry.
We'll let the cricket know, Gail. We'll report you.
To be
I
certain
mean,
to
that's
stay
a
with it.
headline, guys.
okay.
I have to make an apology to the Water Resource Task Force.
Right. So we have minutes from June 15th, ZBA minutes. And I have one change, and that is regarding the members. You have Catherine Howe as present, but Catherine Howe was not present. So that needs to be
Okay.
changed. That was the only change I have. Did other people have a chance to review the minutes? They're only a page and a half long.
I reviewed both of them, and while I did not check them for grammar or spelling, they appear to be correct as I recall the meetings.
Okay,
I agree with Jim. I wasn't taking attendance either, so.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of June 15th, 2022. Do I have a second?
Second, Jim.
So I'll take a roll call vote of the people who attended that meeting. Jim,
Approved.
John,
Approved.
Brian, Brian,
Okay, I froze. Approved.
okay. James? James Mitchell?
Approved.
And Sarah approves. The other set of minutes is the 40B minutes from July 13th. Did people have a chance to look at those?
Yes.
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 I had one minor edit, but I can't find it now. It was state instead of state. It needed to be stated instead of state.
I'll search it.
Okay, it was what somebody said, and it said state instead of stated.
Yeah, I can search that.
Okay. I move to approve the minutes of July 13th, 2022. Do I have a second?
Second.
Jim seconds. Any discussion? Take a roll call vote. James,
Approved.
John,
Approved.
Brian. Just wave your hand. Brian's frozen again.
I'm back.
Oh.
Approved.
Catherine. Yeah, Catherine.
Approved.
Jim.
Approved.
And Sarah approves. Thank you. Status of decisions, we have no outstanding decisions. Other administrative matters, I sent a couple of emails today. Gail listened to the recording from last night's meeting and verified that the vote we took was included in the recording. So we've posted that to the website so we don't have to meet to reconfirm the vote. And I've already received emails from people so people know that we denied that petition.
Gail, for the benefit of Gail, it's on page 3 and it's Mr. Quinn's state.
Oh,
And
thanks.
it should have been stated. The paragraphs are not numbered and I believe it's page 3.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, anything else?
Yeah, just one thing. I'm a little confused. It was raining at your house. It's not raining here.
It stopped now. It was absolutely pouring, unless it was really heavy winds, but it sounded like it was pouring.
Sarah, I think it was heavy winds.
Oh, shucks.
Because I had my screen door open. I'm on my 3rd floor. I didn't see any rain.
Oh, we do live 2 houses apart. I would think we'd be the same.
Well, I was just saying, well, talk about an isolated storm. I was really impressed with that.
I was getting excited to water my lawn.
Oh, I'm losing plants big time.
Well, I thought my rain dance worked for a while there.
I guess not.
Nope, didn't work.
Anything else?
Nope.
No. Thank you for all the time you've been putting in recently, and hopefully we now have a little reprieve.
Yes.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. I think I can speak for everyone that, Sarah, you have done a marvelous job shepherding the 40B process through the Zoning Board of Appeals, and I thank you very much. You've taken a load off all of our shoulders, and we appreciate it.
Thanks.
I agree.
I did send a letter to the Cricket explaining our decision and just thanking the residents and thanking the board for all the work put in so that people understand how much of an effort it was for all of you guys and women.
Are you going to run for mayor?
No. With that, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Take a roll call vote. John,
Yes.
Brian. Frozen again. James,
Approved.
Jim,
Yes, approved.
Catherine,
Approved.
And Sarah approves. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.